Welcome back to The Survival Historian, where we venture into history's darkest chapters to uncover extraordinary human resilience. Today, we're stepping through the gates of a medieval fortress at its most vulnerable moment, not when catapults rain stone upon its walls, but when something far more terrifying takes hold within. Imagine being trapped inside a castle, surrounded by an enemy army, with every grain of food dwindling day by day. The guards no longer sleep. Children no longer cry. They lack the strength. This isn't just history. It's a terrifying look at the desperate measures taken when medieval fortresses face the ultimate siege, starvation. What unimaginable choices would you make to survive? When the gates slammed shut, the psychological shift was instantaneous. Officers swept through storage chambers, counting barrels of grain, salted meat, dried peas and mead. The castle well was checked. This grim inventory revealed a brutal truth. Supplies meant for months would likely run out before any relief army arrived. Commanders understood immediately that surrender would come not from breached walls, but from empty stomachs. Beyond the gates, besieging armies deployed psychological warfare. Enemy heralds called out promises of slow death by starvation. Captured defenders were released with graphic descriptions of the enemy's strength. The besieged knew that every passing day meant fewer supplies while the enemy could potentially reinforce. Hope itself became a luxury commodity that withered faster than grain stores. As weeks became months, rationing became incomprehensibly severe. A soldier might receive 8 ounces of bread daily at first, then 4, then 2, then nothing but hardtack and thin gruel. Civilian populations received even less. At the Siege of Calais in 1346, French commanders ordered women, children and the infirm outside the gates, not from cruelty alone, but because every mouth consumed food that extended the garrison's survival by hours. English besiegers watched as refugees stumbled out, dying slowly between the gates and siege lines. When grain ran out entirely, the horrifying transformations began. Horses were slaughtered first, then dogs, cats and rats, which at least had the advantage of reproducing within the fortress walls. Medieval chronicles described defenders catching seabirds, boiling leather from old saddles, and consuming parchment skins. During the Siege of Malta in 1565, desperation reached such extremes that contemporary accounts suggest acts of cannibalism. Whether propaganda or reality, the fact that such accounts were recorded and believed speaks to the psychological extremity of siege starvation. Water presented an equally critical problem. Besieging armies understood that cutting off water could be as effective as cutting off food. Defenders became obsessive about rationing every drop. Some fortresses attempted to maintain small garden plots in courtyards or kept chickens and fish ponds, converting scraps into protein. These were small advantages against immense hunger, but they represented defiance against passive starvation. As bodies weakened from malnutrition, maintaining the physical fortress demanded extraordinary effort. Walls damaged by siege engines required constant repair. Men weakened by starvation would drag stone and timber to rebuild breaches, working with intensity, born from understanding that each brick was their survival. When traditional stone ran short, defenders packed earth, rubble, and even corpses into broken wall sections, creating makeshift barriers. Defense became theater as much as strategy. Besieged commanders arranged displays of strength that honestly contradicted their true condition. Soldiers marched the ramparts in full armor, even though they were wounded and starving. Any remaining livestock was paraded in plain sight to suggest, that supplies were still abundant. Sometimes fortress commanders even executed defectors right where the besieging army could see, sending a chilling message that the garrison would rather die fighting than ever submit. A terrible calculation meant to convince the enemy that, even a breach would cost them dearly. The practical innovations extended to weaponry adapted from the fortress itself. Boiling oil was sometimes used, but honestly, defenders more often hurled whatever they could find. Stones, broken pottery, old furniture, and even refuse. The famous murder holes or maculations weren't just architectural quirks. They were, in fact, weapon systems, allowing defenders to drop projectiles directly onto attackers scaling siege towers or trying to undermine the walls. The true killer in most medieval sieges wasn't enemy weapons or even direct starvation, it was disease. Thousands of people crammed within walls with only limited water and absolutely no external waste removal created conditions just perfect for breeding pestilence. Dysentery ravaged populations whose weakened bodies simply couldn't fight infection anymore. Pneumonia, typhus, and typhoid fever spread rapidly. The psychological impact of watching comrades die, not from sword wounds but from invisible disease, was honestly corrosive beyond measure. As the months went by, morale it deteriorated in ways that military discipline simply couldn't stop. Soldiers who, once imagined themselves as heroic defenders, now faced this slow, pointless death. Starvation doesn't bring a quick unconsciousness. Instead, it produces this lingering degradation. Strength fades away, and soon enough reason follows. Men would at times refuse to stand watch, choosing instead to conserve energy they knew, deep down, would never matter. Mutiny became a constant threat. Officers executed deserters not only to maintain discipline, but because any sign of weakness might honestly trigger a complete collapse. The agonizing decision, in the end, fell to the fortress commanders. At what point does continued defense become, mass suicide? Some commanders, bound by pride, fought on until complete annihilation. Others, realizing that prolonging resistance meant death by starvation for thousands, chose to negotiate surrender. These negotiations often determined whether the garrison marched out with weapons and dignity intact, or if they faced enslavement or execution. Medieval sieges, rarely ended with any sort of fanfare. When supplies were truly exhausted and disease had reduced garrisons to just fractions of their former strength, commanders would typically negotiate surrender. Sometimes this meant marching out with colours flying, a convention that acknowledged the defenders' courage. Other times, facing merciless besiegers, garrisons simply opened the gates and accepted their fate. Yet within these grim narratives lay profound humanity. Accounts of medieval sieges contain small stories of people maintaining dignity amid horror. Soldiers sharing meager rations with the wounded, women organizing communal cooking to stretch supplies, music performed on ramparts despite dying in courtyards below. These weren't acts of defeated soldiers, but of people preserving humanity as bodies failed. The tactical lessons, honestly, they transformed military strategy. Commanders learned that provisioning a garrison adequately was just as important as building strong walls. Fortifications were redesigned to, maximize food storage and water collection. Supply chains became absolutely central to military planning. The grim lessons of starvation sieges taught that survival wasn't really about heroism, it was about logistics. These sieges, they remind us that resilience isn't always dramatic. It's about grinding daily efforts to survive and maintain dignity under, frankly, impossible circumstances. The people trapped in these fortresses, they possessed no superweapons, no grand strategies to save them. What they did have was determination to endure, ingenuity in adapting to deprivation, and the ability to find meaning even as death approached. In our world of modern crises, the quiet courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances remains, I think, history's most powerful teacher. The defenders of medieval sieges, they rarely appear in grand historical narratives penned by kings and generals, yet their struggle against starvation and despair represents one of humanity's most profound survival challenges. True resilience isn't dramatic confrontation, it's daily survival calculus, maintaining hope when it's irrational and preserving humanity when circumstances push toward inhumanity. If you found yourself captivated by these stories, like this video and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. Subscribe to The Survival Historian so you never miss an episode. History isn't just about what happened, it's about how we survived it. We'll see you next time.